There we go. All right, success. Okay, let's get this show on the road. What classes do you guys have or things to do after this?
I think I was gonna try and meet up with a colleague at the hospital. So,
Oh, nice, nice. So at the hospital right now?
I don't live that far from there, so I'm still
Oh,
at.
that's amazing. All right, let me make this one bigger so it's easy for you guys to read. There we go. How's that? Cool. So, all right. Well, Nina, Thalia, welcome. Hold on. Thalia, right?
Yeah, that's all right. It's
Thalia.
fine.
Okay. Um, so for today, we're gonna talk about the performance knowledge areas, and we're gonna focus primarily on quality and risk. So for today, since you only have an hour here, we're gonna focus on quality, and tomorrow we're gonna jump into risk management. So just a quick review. These are the 10 knowledge areas, right? So quality is focusing on how we incorporate the planning, quality assurance, quality control to make sure that we meet the project's requirements. And tomorrow we're going to talk about project risk management. So just a quick reminder of where things fall in our 5 sessions. So for today, we're doing performance, so quality and risk. And in your own words, when you hear the word quality, what comes to mind?
Like, I without using the word quality,
Right.
like
When you hear the word quality, you think of quality.
doing projects that improve performance, efficiency, uh, the metrics that are good for healthcare, like making like closing care gaps for patients, to have like fully comprehensive care. So doing projects that involve that.
Very good. How about you, Nina? Just in general, like even outside of healthcare, when you hear the word,
I
like
think it's like
how's this
the
shirt? Oh, that's pretty quality.
project or the product like does what it's intended to do or like what its goal was and it does it in a way that's effective.
So that's actually a pretty accurate because a lot of people when they hear the word quality, that means good, right? But really, quality is not about good or bad. It's about adherence. It's about compliance. So um, let's say you designed a car. One of them is a Toyota Corolla, for example, and another one is, let's say, a Ferrari. So immediately you would think, oh, Ferrari has better quality, it's more expensive, right? Like, um, 10 times the price of Corolla, for example. But that's actually a misnomer because just because something is expensive doesn't mean that automatically the quality is better. We associate it because a lot of times, brands with better quality tend to be more expensive, right? Um, but it's truly adherence to what was planned and what was the actual. So let's say you plan to make 10 cupcakes and you made, well, 9 versus you plan to make 10 cupcakes, but you made 12. Which one is closer to quality? Just thinking about it mathematically. It's the 9 one, right? Because you're one away from the goal nominally versus the other one is 2 away from the goal. So what would be perfect in terms of quality? If you aspire to do 10, you end up doing 10, right? So it's the adherence. So it's really quality at the end of the day. is the difference between planned and actual, right? So if you adhere to the plan and you don't like the outcome, you change the plan and then you work on adhering to that plan, right? So if you're so let's say that you plan to do like cars are an easy example. Say 150 horsepower, which is not a not a really good horsepower car. Hold on one second. I apologize. Let me let me get my dog out real quick. One second.
Are you at home right now, Nina?
Yes, I am. It's been nice being on spring break, not having classes. It's a game
Oh
changer.
my gosh. You're doing 3 classes next quarter?
No, just two.
All right. I hope you don't hear it too loudly. It's just-
I don't think I heard him before, actually.
oh, good. He was literally right beside me. So Zoom is getting better at taking out the noise. So yeah, so when you think of quality, think of adherence. And if you adhere to a good plan, great. But also if you adhere to a bad plan from a quality perspective, you met what was targeted. So that's kind of the nuance that I want you guys to remember as we leave. So if something, let's say you're working on medicine or vaccine or a treatment, and you were able to do as planned, but the outcome wasn't what you desired, then you don't look at the actual, you look at the plan, right? That's what you change, because then the actuals will follow this new plan. So we'll talk more about that and the tools that we use to look at adherence, right? So, um, and risk management we'll cover tomorrow. So, all right. So um, in terms of the 3 areas to think about in quality management, the first one is planning. There's a lot of prep that needs to happen, especially if you're working for like a pharmaceutical company or anything that manufactures or creates, right? Either medications, equipment. Um, there's a lot of planning that goes into the, how do we go about, first of all, how do we go about and make sure that the specifications are what we want to get the outcome that we desire, right? So that's number one. After we figure that out, then we figure out, okay, how do we measure it, right? Because not all measurements are the same. And the second one is, okay, we figured out the plan, we're solid there. How do we go about and make sure that if there are aberrations, right, that we're managing it appropriately? And lastly, in terms of controlling quality, okay, we were able to catch and manage, we were able to catch if there were aberrations under control. Were we able to react to them, right? So if it's a product, do we need to rework it, right? If it can be fixed, or do we need to scrap it all together if it cannot be fixed, right? If the product is, so that's if the product is within the manufacturing. If the product has already gone out, it's been shipped, let's say brake pads, for example. What happens when the manufacturer realizes that there were problems with brake pads? What did they do? It starts with an R. They do a
Repair?
recall.
Recall.
Yeah, so they call everyone with this model, if your car was made in 2017, and they recall, they bring it back, and then they fix it. And the second part, Thalia, is repair, right? So after they call you back, then they do the repair. So that's all under control quality. Now, ideally, you want to catch these aberrations internally, right? So it, doesn't cause damage both in terms of your reputation and also the product. But also once it's external, now you're dealing with um, not just the customer that bought it, but also everyone that they talk to, right? Because when do you tend to leave a good review? When you had a good experience or a bad experience, right? So people, when they have a bad experience, that's when like, oh, let me go and tell people, don't come to this sushi place. But if it was good, they're like, oh, that's great, and they just go on with their day. So you want to be able to control things before it gets to your customer. So that's under control quality. So you plan it, you manage it, right? You want to make sure that you capture any aberrations. And then lastly, you control it. You make the necessary actions to fix it, to rectify it. So these are some of the common tools that we use. Control charts, histograms, scatter diagrams, cause and effect, checklists, and flow charts. And I have a slide for each one. But before I dive in, I want to make sure that I touch upon the areas that you're not too familiar with in terms of usage, and the ones that you're more familiar with, we can kind of browse through them. So just tell me, as we go through, if you're pretty familiar, use this a lot, and you're good to go. Okay. So the first one is control charts. So for control charts, um, you want to be able to understand what are the control limits. So ideally, right? Ideally, you want, if you're looking at this graph, ideally you want everything to be here in the middle, right? But that's not life. That's not reality. Some things are higher than expected, lower than expected. But you have what's called, your common cause variation, or these are the variations that they're not ideal, but they're still acceptable. Does that make sense? So you have a range, right? So let's say that you're creating medications, you know, let's say for example, 500 milligram pill. Now that could be 498.75, right? Or that could be 500.23, right? So not everything is exactly at that point. So then you have to make a decision, what are our controls? What is acceptable? What's the lower limit of what's acceptable? And what's the higher limit of what's acceptable? And then you look at items that cross either the upper limit or the lower limit, because then it's outside of what's acceptable. Does that make sense? So this internal one, that's fine. You have your limits. Um, and what's outside is that you'd either send it back, either scrap it or rework it. Now, companies have different ways of creating ranges. So back in probably about 80s, mostly 80s, um, Ford, their ranges were a bit wider in terms of their quality control as compared to a Toyota, for example. Toyota had a smaller uh, range. So what happened was there was this story wherein uh, Ford engineers went to Japan to see how they were doing their manufacturing, right? And as they're going through, um, they got to the end of the manufacturing where they're putting in the doors. That was the last thing that they did. And one of the Ford engineers asked the Toyota engineers, like, hey, where's your soft hammer? And the Japanese engineers were like, what's a soft hammer for? And he said, when it it doesn't fit by just a little bit and you just have to hammer the door in, right? It's a soft hammer, so you don't damage the door. You just kind of, do a little nudge to get it in if the specifications are a little off. And you know what the Toyota engineer said? we don't have a hammer because we hammered in our specifications. Because they fixed it in the front end, they don't have this soft hammer in the back end. So I love this story because it's a great metaphor for how we do things and see things. A lot of times we are kind of a little loosey-goosey in the front end, and then we tell ourselves, oh, we'll just fix it later on, right? Well, we'll deal with it if there's a problem. So as you go about and you're looking at these control charts, or you're part of a project that has, quality assurance and quality controls, ask yourself, are we using a soft hammer? Are there things that we could have fixed in the front end or could be more rigorous, right? That we aren't, and we're giving ourselves the leeway to just soft hammer it in the back end, right? Um, just broad strokes, an example of this in healthcare would be the side effects, right? As you guys know more than anyone, you have a drug that does these three wonderful things, and then the rest of the commercial, right? is all of the side effects of the drug. Um, Maybe, just maybe, we can hone in the formulation a little bit more, tighten it up a little bit more, so that list of side effects won't be as drastic, right? So that is the use of a soft hammer. Yeah, we'll give you this, but we'll throw in some Zofran because you might feel nauseated, right? So that's a soft hammer approach. What if we can fix it in the front end? Maybe we can decrease the nausea as we formulate the medications, so you don't need a soft hammer, in this case Zofran, in the back end to help you out. So these are things to think about as you're going from good to great in terms of quality. How can we decrease this gap, right? This range here from upper limit and lower limit, um, in a way that's obviously realistic. All right, so that's a control chart. The next one is a histogram. So histogram is pretty straightforward, right? You have your normal curve here. However, that's not always the case as with different graphs. So are you guys familiar with the word skewed? So skewed to the left, skewed to the right, right? So there are things that move things either to the left of the chart or the right of the chart. And what I like about histograms is to see it over time, right? Like, how is this behavior changing, right? With anything new that you introduce. And it's about looking at it, for me, it's about looking at it in a trend way versus just a snapshot. Because if you look at this, for example, okay, what is this? Histogram pharmacy drug dispensing. So the highest is around 41 to 50 minutes. Okay, cool. Um, was this daytime? Was this midday? Was this afternoon? How is that over a week? How is it over a month? You know what I mean? Like, how does this change as you insert different variables? And variable could be time, variable could be personnel, variable could be different days, how is it on the weekend, right? So as you're looking at a histogram, always ask yourself, what happens when different variables were introduced in the past, right? And what are the things that we could introduce? Let's say that you want this to be more skewed towards the left, right? You want the times to be shorter. Okay, so what can we do to skew it to the left, right? So these are things that you want to look at as you're looking at histograms. So any questions with histograms? Oh, pretty straightforward. Cool. Um, it always, I'll tell you a story. There was actually it was about this one. Are you guys familiar with the whole um I think it was oxycodone, where what was that family that that created the drug. It was featured on Netflix. I had this whole series on um ah they eventually had to file for bankruptcy because they lost in court and whatnot. So many people were dying of oxycodone. And one of the things that they were able to uh, get by and get approval for these higher and higher doses was when they were presenting to the FDA. What they did is in one of the graphs, they actually um, changed the x-axis. So it would go from, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30. And then it went to like 35, 40, and then 41, 42. So the middle part they squished. And what they were trying to prove on a graph was, hey, the patients don't have that intense of withdrawal symptoms. And as FDA was looking at it, they're just kind of flipping through, right? They saw that there wasn't a lot of these guys. There wasn't a lot of spikes. So they're like, oh, so it truly is kind of this extended release. So it shouldn't be that addictive because there isn't any spikes. Also, there's any sudden drops, right? The troughs. So they were able to, Purdue was the name of the family, Purdue family. They were able to get away with this by manipulating the range on their control charts. So being mindful of just this, like, okay, how is the scale created? And you would think that, like, who would fall for this trick, right? These are, masters, if not doctorate degree, people looking at this, and they're very comfortable with statistics. Who would fall for it? But lo and behold, that was the trick that they used, and they were working with this consulting firm that helped massage the data so it would get approved. It was crazy. But these types of charts, my point is, can be manipulated to tell a story, right? If you change the parameters, let's say you change these times here, instead of like 10-minute intervals, let's say you make it, I don't know, 30 minutes. Then this hill won't be as steep. It'll almost be like just a small little bump here, right? As you change the parameters. So understanding uh, the information that you have in front of you and understanding how it will be perceived, and also just really having this fidelity to, I'm here to tell the story of what the numbers are showing versus I'm here to convince Nina of something. Does that make sense? A lot of times people use these graphs to tell a narrative to their liking versus tell the story that the numbers themselves are presenting, right? So as you look at this, always be skeptical. And not because you don't trust the person presenting, but always be skeptical and ask yourself, how would this look if they change the parameters either on the x-axis or the y-axis? Would it still tell the same story? And if not, let's have that conversation, right? So I'm hoping after today, you would have that extra lens while you look at these charts and say, I wonder what happens if I change those ranges. I wonder what happens if, let's say in this case, I change the frequencies. Will it tell a different story, right? Another example is a scatter diagram. So a scatter diagram only becomes useful when you have different data points showing up over time, right? One or two data points won't mean anything. But if you have a lot of data points, then a scatter diagram becomes very useful. So a positive correlation scatter diagram, right, is when one variable increases, the other tends to increase as well. A friend of mine put together, this was like maybe 15 years ago, this tool that connected with Twitter. Is before it was X. And what it was just searching for keywords. And the keywords included fever, cough, miss work, kid at home, miss school, things like that in the chat. They even threw in chicken noodle soup. So as they were getting these words, they were popping up, right? So these keywords, as they were popping up on the screen, let's say, let's just put that, for example, on the y-axis. Let's say the y-axis is keywords. The x-axis was increase in admissions, ER admissions, urgent care admissions, right? So they were correlating the two. So one data source was Twitter, and the other data source was just admissions per day, right? They were able to figure out that there was this, flu endemic. It was just in Washington. I think it was 10 days before the CDC figured it out. 10 days. All because they found this positive correlation of when people, and they filtered by area, right? So they got the data filtered by area, filtered by the keywords I just told you. As they saw these increase of kids sick, missing work, chicken noodle soup, not feeling good, and also they looked at the data of patients being admitted was spiking, they were able to say, wait, there's something going on here, guys. And lo and behold, they informed the CDC that, hey, you're having a spike in flu incidences in this area. And CDC was like, no, no, we're not. And lo and behold, 10 days later, they were able, big enough, sample, they were able to catch on. So, and it works, negatively as well, right? So, let's say, for example, COVID, and let's just use Twitter for your y-axis. You're looking at that data. Maybe you look at playing outside, running, cardio, workout, HIIT, right? Your high intensity interval training. Like all these words, going out, what is it? Social distancing. So you look at that, more likely than not, you'll have a negative correlation between that group, that demographic, and going to the hospital because they have, COVID symptoms. So that's a negative correlation. The higher these words are, right? The lower the cases of people being admitted. So it's a very powerful tool when you have a lot of data coming in and you want to see, is there any correlation between the data that I'm getting? Does that make sense? So scatter diagrams are really pretty amazing tools once you hone in on what you are looking at and what are the trends that you're trying to capture. So it could be positive correlation, negative, or it could be no correlation at all. Let's pretend there's a third graph here, and let's say they were looking at where people were going in terms of restaurants or takeouts, right? So that might not have any correlation, right? So regardless if they were getting, Vietnamese food, Korean food, or whatnot, that might not have any correlation in terms of patients being admitted, right, in that area. So scatter diagram is an amazing tool to look at relationships when there probably isn't one, but if you plot it, there might be some story that comes out of it. Any questions with scatter diagram? Pretty cool, right? How about this one? Have you guys used this before?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the cause and effect Ishikawa diagram. Now, one way of using this is you start with a problem. So, Thalia, do you remember how you guys used this before?
Um, I think it was I actually use it in the class, Nina, that you and Aaron are going to take in the spring,
Oh,
where
perfect.
uh the class was all about like trying to come up with an innovation,
Mm,
um, like a technological innovation to help healthcare delivery, essentially. And so so one problem was like we want to improve access to mental health resources. So like that's like the end goal. And then
okay.
um there were like uh different factors that you'd like want to consider, like is there like issues with access when it comes to like digital access, or is it like physical like barriers like transportation? And then we'd like list different things that would go into it, and then it all like it's kind of like tree branches almost. So I don't know if it's exactly the same, but
Yep, that's it. So the only, you know, like for it to fit into this diagram would be instead of doing the outcome, you focus on the problem. So if you were to rephrase that into a problem statement, how would it look like?
the problem statement is that my patients don't know what mental health resources are available to them.
Okay. So with that statement, it sounds like a knowledge deficit problem. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay, so if it's knowledge deficit, then you can look at what are the things that affect knowledge deficit. Number one, it could be access to the resources, right? All the different mediums. It could be people. It could also be cultural, since you said mental health, right?
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
huge cultural bias in terms of how mental health is viewed versus, for example, orthopedic issues. No one has an issue with a broken hip, right? But you start talking about mental health issues, some cultures are more open to it than others.
yeah,
Access to um, the social determinants of health, right? So, do you have access to get into a bus? Do you have car transportation? Can you get to, right, an area that can provide these immediate mental health diagnosis for you? So you list out all the factors, right, that affect this problem, either positively or negatively, right? So, for example, transportation. If you have a car, great. You don't have a car, well, that's obviously an issue. So that's one way of doing it. You start with a problem. Other folks have done kind of a reverse Ishikawa, which is, okay, now that you've figured out the problem statement and all the factors, right, that lead into the problem, you can reverse it and then talk about, okay, here's the solution. So in this future state, there's good access to mental health facility. And what's the situation with transportation? Oh, we actually have vouchers that they can use and, can use the bus, for example, and use this voucher and, then Okta or whoever figures out what to do with that with UCLA and gets reimbursed, whatever. Um, you can reverse it and now focus on the solutions that you have, right? For example, night and weekends, that's obviously a big issue. Maybe we can add more staffing there, right? Language, maybe we can have people that can translate into Spanish, into Vietnamese, depending on what area you are in. So all these things that are, as you flip it, it could be solutions based. And the nice thing about this is it separates it into different categories so you can assign people to it. So like Nina, you're in charge of, let's say, environment, right? Do we have, or let's say in this case, cultural, do we have a resource materials that talks about mental health and how this isn't something that the patient either made a bad decision, now they have, bipolar symptoms, right? A lot of these things are genetic, it's out of their control, right? They didn't will themselves to have this, or they didn't do something that now, as a byproduct of their actions, now they have this. So that's something you can run with, right? If you have that swim lane, or in this case, that fishbone, right? That you can say, okay, I'm in charge of this. Or Thalia, transportation. I'll figure out what we can do in this area, right? So on and so forth. So it makes it super clear. And also, if there are problem areas where you don't have solutions or you don't have resources to tackle it, it's also very visual. You can clearly see, let's say one of these fish bones is funding. We just don't have enough funding to open it during the weekends. So it's very visible, like, oh, okay, you don't have anything to tackle that. Maybe we put a task force together to figure out how we can raise funds, either privately or publicly, to get more funding so we can have more resources or keep the clinic open, either nights or weekends. Does that make sense? So the whole purpose of this is quickly to give you an idea of what the problem is, what are the factors, and what are the sub-factors that lead into the problem, right? So all of these charts really is to give you an idea, in a few seconds of what they're looking at and what is going on. All right, so that is Ishikawa. Next one is checklist. This is actually one of my favorites. The industry that really took this to heart and ran with it is the aviation industry. That whole redundancy system, right? That is something that the aviation industry has nearly perfected. And there are a lot of things that we can learn from them. One of them is what's called the read-do format, which is as you say it, you're doing it, right? Um, for us, for example, check patient's wristband. So, Maria Garcia is indeed Maria Garcia, right? So as let's say Nina, you're the one reading the checklist, Talia is the one doing it. So right there and then, read, do, read, do. So I'm saying it, you're doing it, right? So that's a read, do format. Another way to do it is do confirm, right? So as Talia, let's say we're infusing blood, right? So okay, check for fever, all of that. Did you check for? So it'd be reversed. So Bali, you could be asking Nina, did you check the patient's temperature? No fever, correct? Yes. Did we give let's uh let's say Benadryl if the patient has, tendency to have allergic reactions? Did we give that? Yes, check. So this one is do confirm. Like you're asking, have you done this, right? Um, so redo, do confirm are two things that we borrowed from the aviation industry that has really helped. And there's this, old book by Atul Gawande called The Checklist Manifesto. Have you guys heard of this? It's a really
I
good book if you haven't. It talks about early on, so maybe about 15 years now, 15 to 20. This was when we were doing the beginning really of making the surgical pause standard throughout the industry where we would, patient, before doing surgery, we would stop and then someone would be in charge of saying, okay, this is, John Smith. We're doing a procedure on the left knee. We're doing, total knee replacement, whatever it is, the age, blood type, all the things that you want to know prior to surgery. And you would go around the room, the surgeon, anesthesiologist, scrub nurse, circulating nurse. You would go around the room and say, yes, I concur. So that at any given point, someone can say, I thought it was the right knee, or I thought his blood type was O, or I thought that he didn't have a ride home. Whatever it is, someone can raise their hand and speak up. Because what Atul found in his research was almost always someone new, right? You've heard of the tons of cases about wrong site surgeries, wrong types of surgeries. Patients were given something that they were allergic to, so on and so forth. As you went down the list from pre-op to post-op, there was always someone who knew about it. But what happened is They were just not empowered to raise their hand and say, hey, wait a minute. I thought it was the other side, and not be yelled at. There was this one case that um, I was involved in. It's a community hospital, and they did the wrong side brain surgery, wrong side. And I was the manager for the heart and vascular. And although this was a neuro case, I was in charge of interventional radiology, right? So we had some IR folks there. They're part of the whole discovery and whatnot. And turns out it was the right approach. This was early 2000s. So apparently, because of the tumor that this kid had, opening it up from the other side, the wrong side, was the right way to do it because it allowed the tumor to kind of move that way. So there was more space for it. And they could manipulate it better. So it turned out to be the right thing. But again, what is quality? Quality is adherence, right? We had a plan. The plan was go on to the left, but you went into the right. So you did not adhere to the plan. So as we went through, you know, some of the nurses knew, but it's kind of hard to raise your hand to a neurosurgeon and say, you're doing the wrong side, buddy. Right? It's a neurosurgeon. He's looked at the CT a million times, the MRI a million times, right? Before he did it. How could he get it wrong? So maybe I'm wrong. So this surgical pause has helped prevent a lot of these types of cases because anyone can raise their hand and say, I thought it was. And if you turn out to be wrong, it's not punitive. Does that make sense? So a lot of surgical complications have been helped by this surgical pause, which Atul championed, think about 15 years ago or so. So yeah, if you haven't read the book, it's just a short book, maybe 235 pages, not too long, that you'll enjoy. So having checklists is just an amazing way. It's very simple. So in your practice, think about what are the things that you might forget or might miss out on because it's too easy to, and just have that for yourself, right? Um, I use when I was working in the ER before, I would use the checklist a lot to remind me of making sure that the patient had a ride because I would forget about that. So that was the thing that because it's not medical, it was after, but guess what? Um, if patients gave them a lot of narcotics and whatnot, and they would tell you, yeah, that my spouse is out there or my son or whatever, and you just kind of let them wait in the waiting room, and lo and behold, they were alone, and guess what? They would try to drive themselves home. So I would make it a point to meet that person, the designated driver. So that was for me one of my checklist items. So it has to be obviously relevant to you. So figure out, in what you're doing, whether, at work or in your personal life, what are the things that if you had a checklist and adhered to would improve that which you're doing. Flowcharts. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen and used flowcharts a million times. What I would say is to optimize your use of flowcharts, make sure that you start with a clear purpose. What are you trying to show, right? And also make sure that the symbols you use are standardized. So if, and if you use Visio, like, a triangle is a decision point, that the oblong shape is like a process. So there are, whatever it is that you use, have a legend at the bottom and make sure that you use it consistently. These are like super basic stuff, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen presentations wherein the symbols are not standardized. So it makes it really hard to follow. And also try to limit it 1-to-1 flow, right? So people can clearly see things. If you want to use multiple flows, use a swim lane, for example, so that each item is clearly delineated. So the goal is to quickly express, right? Quickly express your ideas through the use of imagery. But if your ideas is, well, too complicated, too complex, or trying to throw in too much, then it causes confusion versus clarity. Does that make sense? So when in doubt, when it comes to flowcharts, less is more. All right, two more slides here that I have for you, and we will wrap it up. So in terms of quality management, here are some of the common issues. One is inadequate quality planning. People just want to get started, right? Let's go, let's do this. But you need to take some time to figure out, okay, what is the plan? How do we measure it? Who's doing it? How do we report it, right? And what do we do when we have aberrations, right? So have that nailed down. Then document it. Make sure that you have good documentation, because if you don't, then you, among other things, you will fail to see trends. If there's one thing in quality management that you want to be really good at, is looking at trends. Individual data points are not as powerful as trends. And you can't see those trends if you don't have good documentation. Inconsistent quality standards. You want to make sure that regardless of who's doing the measuring, you're measuring the same thing, right? Insufficient testing processes. Let's say that, have you guys heard of it's just pretty recent, I think it was this month. There was this drug manufacturer in India that was found out to have like contamination and whatnot. And it was actually, some of the drugs that they developed were actually shipped to the US, and people were getting sick. So they didn't have sufficient testing processes to check for contaminants, right? I think it was heavy metals. I don't remember. But the point is, these things happen on large scale with multi-billion-dollar companies. So you would think that, this would happen in a smaller shop, but not with companies that are well established, have been doing it for a while. But nope, all of these basic things sometimes get neglected. And in this example, people got hurt. Delayed quality control. Okay, now you've seen an aberration. How fast are you in responding to that aberration, right? And also, if you don't have good stakeholder involvement, because a huge part of quality control, quality management, is communication up and down the chain, right? So that you can adjust when things are outside of your normal limits. So those are the common issues, and the solutions are, well, good planning, improved requirements documentation. You standardize the process so that whoever comes in, you're measuring the same thing. Enhanced testing methodologies. Maybe there's a new way of testing for contaminants, like in that India manufacturing case that was on the news. And early quality controls. How can we catch things sooner, right? And increase stakeholder engagement. For this, you really need to have a culture of trust wherein anyone can raise their hand and say, hey, I think there's a problem here, right? And if you do have that, then you will catch these issues sooner rather than later. So that completes our conversation around quality. Before I let you guys go, I'd love to hear if you guys have anything that you picked up from today, or anything that was reinforced from what you were already doing.
Yeah, I think it's good to review the different ways that we are able to process information, like the different visual representations. I was trying to find, maybe I'll find it later and bring it to tomorrow's, but there's this like really good slide deck of like this visual, like like conflated visual representations that have
Mm,
been used in the media, kind of like what you were describing.
right, right.
I was trying to find it, I couldn't, but I will. Maybe I'll try and look harder after today's class and bring it tomorrow.
Oh, that would
Um,
be great. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because you can tell a different story by
Mhm.
changing either the
Yeah.
variables or the parameters on your X and Y axis.
Yeah. And it's like definitely just kind of like like it's a balance, right? Where you do sometimes want to show data in a certain way, but obviously like not artificially manipulate it. But
Absolutely.
it can, shown in the certain way, tell a different story.
Yep. Thank you. How about you, Nina? Anything that was new or anything that reinforced what you have known or have been using before?
I think it was a good reminder of the different kinds of ways to view data, because I think when I look at information and how I want to display it, I tend to lean on the stuff that I'm familiar with and that I comment, like I always end up using the same thing. And so it was
Right.
a good reminder of like, no, you actually have different options.
Correct. Cool. Well, on that note, thank you guys for sticking around. I hope that as you start looking at quality, you'll hopefully see it in a different lens. And again, it is about adherence and it is about um, early alarms, right? If there are any aberrations, so you can do your controls and rectify as needed. So thank you guys, and I'll see you again tomorrow. What time are we meeting tomorrow? You guys have your calendar?
It looks like it is at 4.
4. Oh yeah, yeah, it was 4 to 5. Yep, absolutely. Cool deal. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Right.
Take care, guys.